future, talk radio will actually educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
There we go. And greetings and citations, everyone. You have tuned into Dr. Judy, WTF, for What the Freud here at UBN Radio Network. I am your host, No, I'm not. I'm Dr. Lusk today because Judy's running late. She had a really long session with a patient, so she's going to call in a few minutes. But we're going to start, and we're going to do a double show this week and then next week. It's on splitting, so we're going to split the show. This week, we're going to do narcissistic splitting, and next week, we're going to talk about borderline splitting. So we're going to split the show in two parts, and this, of course, is part one. And you can catch us on Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and, of course, YouTube. And we love all the likes, shares, and comments that you've been getting. Last week, of course, we did the show on, emotionally unavailable parents. It was actually the third part of our show, and the comments were fabulous, and it was a great show. So splitting is the practice of regarding people and situations as either completely good or completely bad, and a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extreme idealism and devaluation, and that's what narcissists do mostly. Fundamentally, all this comes down to uncertainty and a need for control. Now, this is a great analogy I wanted to start with, and that is the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde split. And here's just an example of a situation, and we're going to expand on it. It is a beautiful afternoon, and you and your lover are strolling through the park, watching passers-by who had also stolen a few minutes from work to appreciate the wintry day. You reach over and immediately squeeze your partner's hand. He pushes your arm away and seethes. How dare you? You're now facing a madman who is accusing you of posthumous things, of having spontaneously caressed his arm. You make the assumption that there is an explanation for his anger and his frantically search for a probable cause. You attempt to calm him down, but your ministrations are perceived as in being very trivialized. He doesn't need to be cuddled by you. He insists you are the problem. And he accuses you of controlling him. You embarrass him, and your clinging behavior, can't you and won't you just please grow up? And besides, he's accusing you, you're always accusing him, making a fool of him and in front of other people, and you're always acting as though he's your possession, with emphasis, of course, on always. When a narcissist is raging, most people assume there is a rational point to it, but they underestimate the degree of irrationality they're dealing with. This is because narcissists used primitive and immature defenses, preserving their self-inflicted self-esteem and precocious power and their need for control. So therefore, you end up with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which, of course, is splitting. Now, before we continue, what I wanted to do was talk about an interesting analogy that I found in an article. Where'd it go? About how narcissists treat people. And yeah, we've talked a lot about narcissistic supply, but think of you as an appliance. Okay, you've got your cell phone, you've got your computer, you've got maybe your TV. You love it. It's wonderful. It's fabulous. Or even your toaster, right? But it's very difficult to have an emotional connection to all those. And here's Dr. Judy. Hi, you're on the air with Walt.
I am.
Hello, Dr. Judy. And you're fighting wonderful LA traffic.
This is wonderful LA traffic, and I actually did make it. I just have to find a parking space. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
And thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.
And it's Dr. Judy, if you cannot recognize my voice. And pathetically, I've been stuck on the 101 freeway.
One of the world's
Speaking
biggest
of
parking
splitting,
lots.
right?
Yeah.
I have a splitting headache. Let's start with the definition of splitting. Splitting headache based on inability to fulfill on time schedule. I just want to say a couple of things about the definition of splitting, and then I'm sure I'll be in a couple of minutes. Splitting is a very primitive defense mechanism that we develop in early childhood. So if you think of the word splitting, what's that mean, Walt? Black, white, good, bad, yes, no. So in order for people to control the environment, in order for children to feel safe, they have to be able to distinguish between good and bad really quickly. So what they do is they split. Oh, mommy, look at the bad man. Oh, mommy, look at the fairy. And this particular primitive mechanism, if it doesn't integrate into the person's core of being through development, stays in that format. And then it looks pretty strange when we become adults because we're not able to live in that gray area. We're not able to really integrate life, in a sense, and have a full spectrum of experience. So that, speaking of cracked lens, everything is black-white. There's no clarity, and it goes very quickly, and sometimes people flip-flop from one to the other, and then when they do so, it's really, really disorienting, not only to the person, but to other people as well. And so I now officially have a parking space, and I don't know if they'll let me in. Will they let me in at the front door?
Oh, goodness, it's after 8. We'll make sure that happens. So
Okay, I'm going to come to the front door
all
right now.
Well, thanks for
Okay,
calling.
So maybe,
and
I
hopefully
will
make it
be
in
there
studio
live.
soon. Thanks. Bye, Dr. Judy.
yes, okay, bye.
So getting back to before Dr. Judy gets here, talking about an appliance. So what happens is, the appliance breaks. And you go, oh, gosh, I got to get another appliance. And I got to go spend money and do that. Well, that is the mentality that a narcissist treats us as narcissistic supply. Narcissists love to be more superficial. We love appliances as long as they do what they are supposed to do. Who decides what they're supposed to do? Who decides what they're supposed to do? We do. Simply, narcissists decide what other people are supposed to do and what the expectations are not fulfilled. The scene can be something swearing as simple as swearing at a computer, right? So it's based on the functionality, right? If as long as the function is there, they are happy. But the thing is, narcissists can't love. Whatever you behave the way you want to, they love you. When you don't, they don't love you because they can't love themselves. So I thought this was a really interesting analogy in the fact that basically you to a narcissist, again, we've talked a lot about narcissistic supply, but the best analogy I've come across is this article that they treat you like a flippin' appliance. And if you want our notes, you can write us at info@drjudywtf.com because I do a lot of research for all the shows. And you're more than welcome to have any of the show notes from any show we've done for the last 4 years available. So when we look at the Dr. Jekyll and Hyde split, their splitting is basically projection. And as Judy said, split reality is including all bad, all good, extremes, shades, and there's no shades of gray, and it's black and white. So, yay! Welcome, Dr. Judy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
So they have rage, and they don't have remorse. They get really, really toasty with that toaster that broke.
Thank you very much. It's so nice to be here live.
And you're gonna have to get really close to the microphone.
Okay. So people have been complaining that the mic is not picking up.
No,
the
it's
sound.
the mic's not working.
Is it not working?
It's the other one, I think.
Oh boy, technical difficulties, freeway difficulties.
Yes.
How is the mic? You guys,
Okay.
There we go.
Oh, thank you. So it's so nice
There
to
we
be
go.
here live. I feel less split now that I'm sitting here. Speaking of human disconnect,
Me
freeway
too.
disconnect.
Me
Thank
too.
you, Walt.
Me too.
Thank you for introducing
Sure.
the show. So I know that we're talking today about the roller coaster ride of splitting. And what diagnosis does this go with mostly is we've talked a lot about different personality disorders, and labels are used for convenience and for helping to understand a system's gone wrong from my perspective. And so people who don't have a really solid inner core, people who do not have a great sense of self, tend to split because they don't have that executive management center within. That's missing. So how does that happen? So if you don't mind putting the mind map up.
I don't at all.
Thank you very much. I will explain from a mind map perspective why people split.
And those that are listening, you can go to drjudywtf.com and find it yourself.
So if we look at panels 1, 2, and 3, that's the formative first, let's call it the first 3 years of life. Panel number 1, wounds of childhood. Wounds of childhood and the light of childhood is the first split. So when we have the light, which is all the nurturing, all the mirroring, all the attunement, the breastfeeding, the eye contact, the skin contact, the good enough mothering, that's the good stuff. The bad stuff is the physical, verbal, sexual abuse, neglect, and smothering. So can you already begin to see that there is a split? Now, what happens is that if we don't have that good enough parenting and we don't have the emotional goodies that go into our psyche, I call them the psychovitamins. I love my own little inventions of terms, so bear with me here.
Judaisms.
Judaisms. So if we don't have these psychovitamins and we don't form this nice solid inner core, then we don't get to weave that solid inner core of self. And as I mentioned, that executive function, that is the parental function, is missing. So how do we live in that state? We have to quickly identify. A flying object comes at us. What is it? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it the wicked witch? Is it the Glinda, the good witch? What is it? So from a childhood point of view, we have to make up our minds really quickly. And so if we don't integrate this, and guess who helps us integrate this? Are our parents.
Mommy and daddy.
Right, or our primary caregivers, if you will. And how do they help us integrate this? Well, on a pre-verbal and non-verbal level, they're supposed to shield us and protect us and nurture us so that our entire amygdala system, if you will, doesn't go into fight-flight. It stays nice and centered and calm. And if we're able to stay centered and calm, we're able to focus and we're able to think and we're able to be better cognitive decision makers. If this amygdala isn't soothed and centered, calmed, then it's like watching my grandson this weekend. He was just like that. Okay, very cute, but you know, it's cute for a 4 3/4-year-old. Not so cute when you're
44 3/4.
44 3/4. Okay, so what happens is that when we think of these personality disorders, and we've talked a lot about them,
Yeah, we have.
borderline personality disorder comes to mind first because it's the personality disorder that best describes this phenomenon called splitting. And you can see the person's mood shift rapidly.
Real quick. We're going to talk about
Right?
borderline splitting next week.
Right. Okay. So this is something that's going to be experienced by the person as. Okay. So what does this mean, borderline? It means that there's no sense of self. That inner core is missing. Why? Because the parents didn't do the soothing and the mirroring, and they didn't have the consistency, and so therefore, there's no constant sense of emotional regulation. Okay, so if that flying object comes at them, then they'll definitely react to the object. And if that object is a person, if that object is you and they're in a dysregulated state, okay, you're now in the dark bucket of darkness of you've been labeled. You've been labeled bad. You're bad. And if they're in a great mood and they are just somehow for that moment receiving narcissistic supplies, or somehow they've managed to gain some kind of emotional regulation, and that flying object, anybody, comes along, well, then maybe in that moment they're in the good bucket. And it's very, very painful.
And that's the thing, in that moment, because
right,
next moment it might be different.
And, you know, we talk a lot about negative core beliefs. So if you look at panel number 3, that's where everything lands. So all of the nurturance or lack thereof, and then the reaction to the wound, which is the amygdala, and then the encoding of the wound, which is the panel 3, then people will encode something about themselves like, I'm not good enough, or I'm unworthy, or I'm unlovable, or I'm a nothing, or I shouldn't even be alive, or I'm damaged goods beyond belief and I will never heal. And then somebody, anybody, can come along and look at them in any sort of way or say something to them, and that particular trigger will definitely detonate and go into panels 4, 5, 6. So that
Chaos.
past area, the encoding of the past, now plays out as a WTF, a what the Freud in the here and now. And then there is no panel 7, because panel 7, if you can see, is an integration of everything.
And there's also, if you compare panel 7 to panel 1, there's a lot more light.
Absolutely.
And you can elaborate on that one.
Right, and the reason there's a lot more light is because there's a lot more locus of control.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more centeredness, if you will, and there are better boundaries, and then there's a better selection process of who to invite in as partnership, and partnership in health, partnership in finance, so on and so forth. And so through that ability to integrate and become a semi-permeable membrane, as I like to put it, then a person can be that executive manager of their emotions and let in the good and keep out the bad. So can you see how this entire process unfolds into either a really healthy, functional human being that can have a peaceful, healing dialogue more easily and say, geez, you know, Walt, it was really hard on me when I was on that 101 freeway, and I was really worried because I want to be here with you and deliver the information to the audience, and the truth of the matter is this freeway is not moving. Okay, so that would be more of an integrative conversation. Believe me, I was not happy about it, nor did I hit the roof, which allowed me to think and say, hey, Walt, I have a good idea. Why don't I be the first call in on the show? Now, if my amygdala were going crazy, if I had a core belief like I'm an incompetent, stupid person, I'd be activated, and I wouldn't even have thought of that plan. Does that make sense to everybody?
Or even if you thought of the plan, you wouldn't have had the wherewithal and the regulation to go through with it.
No.
Yeah,
No.
it wouldn't have happened.
And I could tell you this, I want to share this with the audience. I was not well regulated at all in my first year and 2 and 3 of life. Not at all. We were immigrants from Hungary. My parents were Holocaust survivors. They survived that, and then they had to escape. And I think I was dropped in the mud, and then I was torn away from my primary caregiver, who was my grandmother, actually. So speaking of dysregulation, I was not, and always wondered, why am I so depressed? Why am I so anxious? Until I started really wondering about it and becoming curious. And as I developed, I got interested in psychology, and you know the rest of the story. So how did regulation come about? Regulation came about through time and practice. So it doesn't just come. And please don't think that just because, and I know we get so many letters, will I ever heal? Can I ever heal? The answer is yes, You can. It's just that the healing is an outside-in job. So throughout the course of my life, I have had a few enlightened witnesses. I've had education. That was something else that regulates me, because now I can think like a shrink, and I actually am now, so I can think like a shrink even better. And so I try to surround myself with loving, supportive people, including 4 3/4-year-old grandchild and dog, and great people like Walt and my friends and family. And so it's an outside-in job, but once you get that outside in, that brick gets laid down foundationally.
Brick by
then
brick.
brick by brick, we build that inner core. We build a sense of self. We check it with friends, with professionals, to make sure that it's getting laid down correctly. And then we start finding that center, that point of sanity, so that we don't go all over the place. Our amygdalas are not going crazy. And then we can think and calm down, and we don't have to split.
That's absolutely fabulous. And I've got an article here I wanted to talk about in terms of that and regulating and such. It's called Soulmates in Hell. I've got some situations that the victim, if you will, of the splitting narcissist do to kind of justify, if you will, and keep in the relationship, as opposed to realizing, maybe not. So the first one, as I mentioned, is rationalize.
Okay.
This is the word you should know. It means when we see something we know is wrong or bad or upsetting or should be alarming, we smooth over our own feelings by making up reasons for the behavior that make it so not so bad or maybe even good by changing the label on the bottle of the poison.
Wow, I love that line. Changing the label on the
Bottle of the poison.
On the bottle of the poison. So rationalization is a higher level of defense mechanism. For those of you who want to know more about the hierarchy of these defense mechanisms. And I believe that borderline, characterologically speaking, are less on that ability, and the more the narcissistic spectrum. And what I mean by that, and I'm going to try not to use as many labels because it's kind of disturbing, even to me. Okay, so what I mean by that is some people's shells are hardened, okay? It's kind of like harden your heart so you don't have to get hurt. And if you harden your heart, then you don't have empathy. And if you rationalize, then you don't have to feel too much, because your cognition could just label the bottle a different label of poison that works for them, and then they don't have to get upset about it. It's kind of like, is it kind of like a euphemism? Like, it's not that bad, right? That bottle that you're drinking there, it's not really that bad because it's sort of okay, it's sort of healthy in its own way. So these kinds of rationalizations are higher level defense mechanisms, and they're utilized by people that are not as split. They're a little bit more integrated. So you can see on a spectrum that the less intrapsychically developed a human being is, the less regulated they are, the more they split, which also means overvaluing and devaluing themselves and other people. So can you imagine what kind of world they must live in if their cracked lens of perception is not giving them accurate feedback, if they're projecting all over you that you're a terrible person and then treating you as such, and then 10 minutes later you're the best thing since sliced bread, and you're trying to figure out, does this person love me? Does this person not love me? Am I in good favor with the person? Am I not in good favor? So can you see how much chaos this dysregulation
Well, we had a show
can
early
cause
on
all levels.
One of our first shows about narcissism was called Walking on Eggshells.
Yes.
Yep. So, I mean, they talk about rationalizing, and they do what we do what's called the yes but, right? Yes, he blows up and I get scared, but you know what? He had a bad childhood. Yes, he's using a lot of drugs and is just terrible, but he's under a lot of stress.
So that would be someone who's explaining the splitting of the person who doesn't have that solid inner core, because ultimately people don't really want to break the bond with each other. They want to maintain it, and people will put up with a lot of discomfort and sometimes outright hell to keep the bond. And that's because we're wired to connect, and that's because we're wired to bond with our primary caregivers, our blueprint, because that's our survival. That's our survival mechanism. So if we don't attach to them and they don't attach to us, we're in deep trouble, because childhood is a
hostage situation.
That's right.
And I read definitely
Mm-hmm.
someone, and maybe grandchildren are hostage situation too. But
I'm good with that. I'm such a
I know,
pushover.
I know you are. I read somewhere, for example, that the narcissist explodes like crazy, and there was one story, and I'll find it, where the person actually mirrored what they did and exploded back.
Okay, so let me shrink that.
And go ahead.
Okay,
I'll look
so
for
I'm gonna shrink this one. So as you now know, the narcissistic defense, which simply means from a systems point of view, the person who's been injured at cause has now created a shell around themselves. And these injuries, if I may go over them again, smothering is one of them, spoiling is one of them, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect. So when that person doesn't have that nice solid sense of self, they develop what we refer to in our profession as a false sense of self. And this false sense of self is kind of like puffing up. They puff to create an image, but inside they're very, very hurt, and they're very vulnerable. And so when this person mirrored the injured, narcissistically injured person, they basically made fun of the false self.
Yes.
They basically pierced the veil of the lie. And when they did that, the person who was putting this narcissistic shell around them crumbled and did not like it. That was it was an exposure, is what it was. Very painful exposure. So that's where they split. See, in that second, they went into their rage. And what do people do in rage? They do the, well, it was the 3 Ds, but I added a 4. They demean, they devalue, they destroy, and ultimately they will discard.
Discard.
Okay, so here's the tricky part, okay? So if somebody with a narcissistic core is with a person with a borderline core, the borderline doesn't want to be abandoned. And so that other person can continue to discard and discard and discard the person with a weaker inner core, and that person will always do what, do you think?
Well, they're eventually going to discard you and get somebody else.
Well, they will, but
Yeah.
what about the person that's been discarded who has abandonment issues?
Well, their sense of abandonment has just been turbocharged.
Turbocharged, and they're not going to want to let go. So they're going to want to come back, and that's going to feed the narcissistically injured person in their narcissism. Okay, so now they're going to have that nice dose of
Narcissistic supply.
Thank you.
I found the article. So you blow up at him. In other words, you're mirroring and matching, and you get mad at him as well, because it's like, you know what, you haven't totally succumbed to them, and you have feelings, and you're a person, and you're not just an appliance. I talked about an appliance while you were
I
gone.
love that appliance metaphor.
So he apologizes not because he's taking responsibility for his harm that he's caused, but because he's fearful you will leave. He's not ready for you to leave, right? Narcissists have fear of being abandoned as well.
That's the deep fear, but the more obvious coding is the one where they're they look more together. But if you scratch the surface enough, there too is a deep fear of being found out that they're not good enough and that they will be left.
Absolutely.
So, Walt, this appliance metaphor, again, speaks to the objectification
It sure does.
of the human, which is a splitting.
Mm-hmm.
You're not human. You're just an object. You're an appliance. I can leave you. What's the big deal? If not you, then I'll just pick up a new appliance on the way. In the meantime, the person with the soft inner core, the dysregulated person, is bleeding out, and that person is just so wanting and needing the bond, they will do anything. And now we've got the basis for, if it emerges that way, the basis for domestic violence. Correct?
It's a match made in hell.
A match made in hell, because that person will not want to leave, and the other person has already hardened their heart, so they don't really feel, and
They're
they
done.
don't really care.
They're done.
Yeah.
They really are. So, and again, I mean, the appliance example was just crazy because, I mean, you know, narcissistic supply. Okay, my toaster broke. No big deal. I'll just throw it in the trash. Go get another toaster. It's a toaster, as long as it cooks toast.
And the splitting sometimes manifests in ways where they need the good, and if they've already demeaned, devalued, and destroyed and discarded, that they split you off for somebody that was in their life in a very significant way off, and so now they look at their next person as the new source of light. Okay, until that supply dries out for them. And how does that supply dry out for them is that, if you don't mind going to panel number 7, I could show you guys in a systematic way.
There's the one with the light.
Right. So what the person who is needy and greedy does is they suck the light out of other people. Again, they don't know how to play the game of interconnection.
No, they're
just
impossible.
Don't know paradigm shift because they have the hole in the soul.
And it's kind of hard for them to love you if they are incapable of loving themselves. And that's the rub.
So building on, how does one love oneself? It's an outside-in job. Our mothers love us, and therefore we feel of value, and therefore we start to value ourselves. If we are not getting that from our primary caregivers, it's really, really hard to love ourselves, because we conclude, based on the treatment of our primary caregivers, that we are or not good enough, lovable enough, smart enough, valuable enough, and on and on and on. And so children always place themselves in this egocentric world. They are the center. And if things are not going well, guess whose fault it is?
You probably have to look in the mirror, I would think.
That's right.
Yep.
The child is always at fault, because I will quote Alice Miller again, because I think it's that significant. A child would rather be a bad child in a good world rather than a good child in a bad world, because that would be a paranoid situation. So if the child is bad, at least they could say, if I'm good, mommy and daddy won't treat me like that. Or if I'm bad, then I deserve it. It's all my fault. And everything then starts to lock into this negative core belief, and it gets reinforced.
And it brings us to our second point, and that's focusing on the potential.
Okay.
In other words, rather than what's actually happening, and thereby you're becoming a codependent.
Say that again, Walter.
You're focusing on the narcissist's potential of what the relationship could be, as opposed to really realizing and admitting what it really is.
Can't, because if you admit what it really is, then there's a part of your brain that says, well, then I have to leave this person because this is not healthy for me.
Correct.
But what's really at stake here is the bond.
Yes.
See, the bond is more important than the treatment of the person in that person's mind. So they will take higher and higher levels of mistreatment, which is why it's a feeding cycle, and then the cycle of violence can begin, and this cycle of violence could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be neglect kind of thing. Yeah.
And along those lines, you think that if you just listen close enough, you can learn to do what he really or she really wants.
Because if you learn to do what he or she really wants, you're going to keep the relationship going. And that's the fallacy, because the person that you are interconnected with, if that's not even so, they're not connected to you, you're connected to them, let's just say, as an example, that they don't really care. And this is where the hand and glove system comes in, is that one is on one end of the seesaw, the other is on the other end of the seesaw, and that's the split in and of itself. These two people, as examples of the borderline personality characteristics and the more hardened narcissistic characteristics, are they play a game of seesaw here because they're not really in sync with each other. There's no interconnection. There's a split between them.
And I love this. And so along those lines, and so to have a good relationship, and by the time you have lost all of your perspective and are tolerating things that you should never have tolerated before, and instead of putting responsibility on him or her, you are now putting it on yourself, and he is putting it on yourself and blaming you.
Right, and this is probably a replica of what happened in the first few years of life. I have many patients who report to me how much their parents project on them. We've done shows on scapegoating and the projection process and so on. And when this is happening during the first few years of life, then your tolerance level for that kind of thing goes up so that it doesn't seem all that unfamiliar or unfamilial. So you'll take it.
And then a couple of things. He expects constant admiration, and he gets angry, of course, if it doesn't happen. And he expects you to protect him from all of life's disappointments. Good luck with that.
So when you say
he gets very angry. I'm talking about the narcissist.
The narcissist, okay.
Yeah, they expect admiration like crazy, and you to kind of be their buffer and protect him from all of the stuff in life that he's throwing out and causing.
Okay, so can you see that the other empty core is a different kind of splitting, really. The quality is different because their emotions are very labile, and in the second case, the emotions are more encrusted, and then something big has to happen, like a mimicking, let's say, or maybe not so big, maybe just something that calls upon themselves to the challenge is how grandiose they are. And if you pierce that veil of grandiosity, then the demean, devalue, and destroy and discard splitting will occur. So it's not a really great game to play. And if you're in this game yourself, or you know somebody that's playing this game, it's a system gone wrong.
It's totally a system totally gone wrong.
You can pull out of it, and the way you pull out of it is you got to identify all of your own wounds of childhood, how they embed and how they encode in you, and then through that process you can gain perspective, and you can start integrating your thoughts around this so that it doesn't look like a child's game anymore, because that's an old game based on pre-verbal and very young kind of thinking and feeling, an underdeveloped personality.
And it's not something you can do by yourself. You need an enlightened witness. You need someone to help you along, to pull you out, because it's just not something, if you're in the thick of it, you're gonna figure it out on your own. You need some help, which is, of course, where we in the Psychological Healing Center come in and can do that really well.
And, I just did want to mention to the audience that I'm now in the process of editing a video that I just created.
Video series.
It's going to consist of 10 sessions, an introduction to the mind map, and the 9-panel process. And instead of coming to therapy to see a live person, you don't have to do that if you're very private about it and you just don't want to see anybody. You can simply eventually soon, in the next month or two, purchase this video series, this mind map video series, and I am the talking person, and I will lead you from the encodings of the past through dismantling them and paradigm shifting into healing. And in it, you will have with you the Be the Cause book. That'll be included in a PDF format. It'll also include the mind map journal, and it'll include a beautiful JPEG version of the mind map so that you can download it and do whatever you want with it, put it up on your wall, and however you want to use that. And it's very inclusionary in terms of what you need as tools to take you from through to. Along with it, at any point, of course, you can opt in to call one of the team members. And I also want to mention, I'm very pleased to have
Another team member.
Yeah. Her name is Sylvia Capra, and she is our latest team member. She's got a master's degree in psychology from Loyola Marymount University, and she's filling a very, very important role at the Psychological Healing Center because she is available to see patients anywhere from $40 to $80 range. And please do not line up for the $40 one all at once because she's filling her practice really quickly. And if you absolutely can't afford any more than $40, that's what she's there for. We will honor it. We want people to do the mind map. We don't want money to be an issue. So please contact us, and we will put you in touch with Sylvia or any one of our wonderful team members. And the point is that in order to really enact healing, you can't just treat the symptoms. You just can't treat the splitting symptoms cognitively and say, hey, straighten out your thinking here. How come you see so-and-so and such as an angel one minute and a devil the next minute? Stop it. Straighten out the thinking. It doesn't work that way. You have to go to the blueprint and the cause, and you have to understand how that entire system got laid down in the first place and then dismantle it so you can shift into higher order thinking.
Absolutely. And with our little time left, I wanted to talk a little bit about what not to do when you're dealing with a narcissist, because we can talk about what to do all day long. Don't argue with a person who is splitting or try to talk sense into them, because that's a recipe for a very circular conversation.
Because they're in their amygdala.
It's not going to happen.
They're in a primitive defense mechanism. So if you try to put rationality to irrationality, they're in fight-flight mode, okay? And you're trying to talk to them in your, quote, higher order thinking state, your adult state. You can't talk adult to a child, so you have to treat them where they're at. And so that's part of the therapy, is to move the person through this childhood state and elevate them and bring them from baby to child to adolescent to adult. And that's the developmental stage. Baby steps. Yeah. Literally baby steps. So, right, don't challenge them. You're going to get back at the splitting. Oh, how dare you? You're a piece of you-know-what. Out the door. It's just, I'm sure many of you have experienced it. And yeah.
Yep. Next is don't blame yourself. As I say, don't should on yourself. And we've talked about that in the show. Don't act like the thought police. Don't use any tricks, intimidation, or ultimatums and try and get someone to see things differently. Everyone is entitled to think the way they think and believe what they believe. You're not going to convince them anyway. Don't be angry with them, or they will retaliate.
Well, you can be angry with them, but I think don't act in an angry manner, because you're going to just keep activating this primitive defensive mechanism.
Because believe me, they will do anything and everything they can to protect and defend themselves. And they will do everything and anything they can not to look at themselves, because that's way too vulnerable. It's not going
And
to
way
happen.
too impossible
It's-
in the way they see it, because what is in there? There's nothing in there. Remember the double dungeon of darkness. You reach for mom, she's not there. You reach for dad, he's not there. You look inside, there's the hole in the soul. Yikes, where are you going to go from there? So don't challenge them. Don't poke at them psychologically. It's not gonna do well for anyone.
But along those same lines, do not yield your own reality about a person or a group, or isolate yourself from healthy friends, friendships, family, social groups, just to keep the peace.
And also remember your own boundaries, that
Yes.
if you're suffering because of this, you get to say no. You get to say, why don't you back away, or you back away and take space, and you have a right. You have a right to choose the people into your life that are going to enhance your life. And if you have a friend or family member who's behaving this way, then if they're amenable to treatment, they need the treatment, because this is not going to change overnight, and it's not going to change just because you ask them to stop doing it. And it's really important for everyone to understand that. This is not something in their control. I got to see that with my little 4 and some odd year old grandson, and he turned to me and goes, "Grandma, help me so that I don't kick so much." I go, okay. So we had to invent a way to help him to calm down his amygdala. And guess what he learned this weekend?
I have no idea.
He learned the mind map.
Oh. Was it with his shoes on or off?
No, they were off. We were sitting on the floor, and he was sitting down next to me. And I've got to tell you the version of the mind map. It's
there
so
it is.
precious. Okay.
There it is.
Panel 1, the boo-boo. Okay? This is spoken from the mouth of a 4 3/4-year-old. Panel 2, the boo-boo starts to hurt. Panel 3, I'm a bad boy. That's the encoding. Panel 4, everything's going crazy. Panel number 5, they're angry at each other. They're not sharing. Panel number 6, they're fighting. Panel number 7, they love each other again. So can you see, the splitting with the little kid, angry to loving each other, then teamwork, and then ultimately peace. So that's from the mouth of a 4 3/4-year-old. And I'm mentioning it because many people who did not get that nurturing don't develop above and beyond that 4-year-old or 5-year-old or 3-year-old or 2-year-old, and they're still kicking and screaming and splitting and demeaning and devaluing and over-idealizing and then putting you down the next minute. And that's that kid that Freud used to call the id. The id is the kid. Primitive.
That's a fabulous interpretation. We're gonna have to use that one. But before we get to our song, I just want to close with this. Some people believe that sending or giving unconditional love will help the narcissist. But here's the thing. The narcissist doesn't want unconditional love. It's not your fault that you cannot love or be loved by them. They were never available for real love in the first place.
Okay, and then on the other hand, the person who has that weaker inner core along the other spectrum of the borderline spectrum, they desperately want the
Yes,
love.
they definitely do.
But it's just that they miss the stage of development to have all those emotional goodies, so their hole in the soul is so big that it's just never enough love, because their core belief is that they're not lovable. And so it's kind of like a little too little, a little too late is how they're always feeling. And the other one cut their heart out. So between the two of them, match made in hell. Lots of splitting, lots of over-idealization and devaluation, and
Dr. Jekyll and
a
Mr.
roller
Hyde.
coaster ride of pathology.
Yep. So in memory of Tom Petty this week, who passed at age 66, we thought we would do a song which kind of fit with what we're talking about, I think. It's a duet he did with Stevie Nicks, Stop Dragging My Heart Around. So I'm going to read the lyrics, and Dr. G is going to interpret the song. Baby, you come knocking on my door. Same old line you've used before. I said you will. What am I supposed to do? I don't know what I was getting into.
Okay, so there's a kind of an optimism. Somebody coming to knock on the door, and the same old line. It's kind of like the person knows that they're manipulating, but you've heard the term love bombing, so maybe they know that the love bombing is coming. Okay, but they didn't know what they were getting into, but they're still there, so now they know what they got into.
Now they know.
Okay, so go ahead.
So you've had a little trouble in town. Now you're keeping some demons down. Stop dragging my heart around.
And so this person's probably more on the spectrum of they need to bond and they don't want to break the bond. So they're not going to leave. They're just going to put up with dragging their heart around because they don't want to break up. It's too painful to break up.
Yeah, it's too painful. It's hard to think about what you've wanted. It's hard to think about what you've lost. This doesn't have to be the big get even. This doesn't even have to be anything at all.
Well, I'm not really clear on these lines, to tell you the truth. It's hard to think about what you've wanted. Maybe the person is trying to evaluate what they want. It's hard to think about what you've lost. Well, it doesn't seem in this case they've lost too much because they're not having a very nourishing relationship at all. And so maybe they're sitting there evaluating. So, what's up? What's going on?
Or it could be they're willing to do whatever it takes. Anything at all to have you be around.
Right.
Right? I mean, it doesn't matter. We're together. Don't bust a bond. Right? Reading on. I know you really want to tell me goodbye. I know you really want to be your own girl. Baby, you could never look me in the eye. Yeah, you buckle with the weight of the words. And stop dragging my heart around.
So this person is almost addicted, maybe addicted to someone who's pretty vacuous. Baby, you could never look me in the eye. All right, there's nobody home. The lights are on, but nobody's home. So there's no loving, nourishing anything there. There's the blank stare.
Or maybe there's no real connection.
And so, but they seem to still stick around and have their heart be dragged around.
People running around loose in the world ain't got nothing better to do. You make a meal of some bright-eyed kid. You need someone looking after you.
People running around loose in the world, that sounds like a lot of chaos, doesn't it? Ain't got nothing better to do. They make a meal of some bright-eyed kid, meaning the vulnerable kid. They make a meal. There's the vampiring thing, isn't it? You need someone looking after you, so they'll basically keep with you, not because they love you, but as you were saying, they need the supply.
They do. Yeah, got to have those appliances. I know you really want to tell me goodbye. I know you really want to be your own girl. Baby, you could never look me in the eye. Yeah, you buckle with the weight of your words. Stop dragging my heart around. Stop dragging my heart around.
So it seems like when he says you buckle with the weight of your words, maybe they're inauthentic, so they don't stand. The words don't even stand up. You can't look me in the eye because looking at the eye is a symbol of connection.
Yes.
Soul to soul. There's no soul to soul here. It's empty.
That's correct. Yeah, they'll do anything to keep the connection,
right,
or what little connection there is, even though there is no connection.
You don't want to split. They just want to split. Overvalue, devalue, but they don't want to split apart.
Exactly. So that's our song in memory of Tom Petty.
Yes.
And, of course, duet with Stevie Nicks, Stop Dragging My Heart Around. This has been Dr. Judy WTF, or What the Freud. I'm your host, Walt Lusk, with Dr. Judy Rosenberg. We've been talking about splitting narcissists, the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and the match made in hell. Next week, we're going to talk about a different kind of splitting. We're going to talk about borderline splitting. So stay tuned for that. And we thank you for watching and listening to us on Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Play, TuneIn, and, of course, YouTube. And you can write us at info@drjudywtf.com. And Judy's plethora of associates is growing. And so if you really have a challenge and we've hit some issues here, feel free to contact the Psychological Healing Center, which, of course, is a sponsor of the show, and get Dr. Judy's book and soon video, Be the Cause, Healing Human Disconnect. So until next time.
In the future, talk radio will actually educate. future, talk radio will actually educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
There we go. And greetings and salutations, everyone. You have tuned into Dr. Judy, WTF, for What the Freud here at UBN Radio Network. I am your host, No, I'm not. I'm Dr. Lusk today because Judy's running late. She had a really long session with a patient, so she's going to call in a few minutes. But we're going to start, and we're going to do a double show this week and then next week. It's on splitting, so we're going to split the show. This week, we're going to do narcissistic splitting, and next week, we're going to talk about borderline splitting. So we're going to split the show in two parts, and this, of course, is part one. And you can catch us on Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and, of course, YouTube. And we love all the likes, shares, and comments that you've been getting. Last week, of course, we did the show on, emotionally unavailable parents. It was actually the third part of our show, and the comments were fabulous, and it was a great show. So splitting is the practice of regarding people and situations as either completely good or completely bad, and a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extreme idealism and devaluation, and that's what narcissists do mostly. Fundamentally, all this comes down to uncertainty and a need for control. Now, this is a great analogy I wanted to start with, and that is the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde split. And here's just an example of a situation, and we're going to expand on it. It is a beautiful afternoon, and you and your lover are strolling through the park, watching passers-by who had also stolen a few minutes from work to appreciate the wintry day. You reach over and immediately squeeze your partner's hand. He pushes your arm away and seethes. How dare you? You're now facing a madman who is accusing you of posthumous things, of having spontaneously caressed his arm. You make the assumption that there is an explanation for his anger and his frantically search for a probable cause. You attempt to calm him down, but your ministrations are perceived as in being very trivialized. He doesn't need to be cuddled by you. He insists you are the problem. And he accuses you of controlling him. You embarrass him, and your clinging behavior, can't you and won't you just please grow up? And besides, he's accusing you, you're always accusing him, making a fool of him and in front of other people, and you're always acting as though he's your possession, with emphasis, of course, on always. When a narcissist is raging, most people assume there is a rational point to it, but they underestimate the degree of irrationality they're dealing with. This is because narcissists used primitive and immature defenses, preserving their self-inflicted self-esteem and precocious power and their need for control.